My name's Sally Young. I'm the Associate Dean Research for the Faculty of Arts. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. Thank you very much for attending. We've been very pleased with how the series has gone this semester. And because this is the last one, I did want to get in a thanks to Juliana Tan for all the organisation and the research office here in the Faculty of Arts. Thank you for putting on such wonderful events, as we have one today, another fantastic event. So I am going to do an acknowledgement of country, which should appear on screen as well. So I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to acknowledge the importance and significance of Indigenous knowledges in the Academy. And today, of course, this is very relevant because we have the BlakAbility Team coming along to talk to us for our Spotlight Series session today. So I'm also, today it's a bit different, I'm not going to do a very formal introduction. The panellists are going to introduce themselves. I'm just going to talk a bit about the BlakAbility Team, which is an ARC Discovery Indigenous project. And it's on the topic of today's yarn, looking at the issues and needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff and students with disability at Australian universities. And I'm just going to hand over to team leader, Sheelagh Daniels-Mayes, who's going to start off today's yarn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we're going to do things totally against all Indigenous protocols today, which I learned to do during the pandemic. But the reasons for that will become pretty clear. So we're not going to introduce ourselves, we're not going to tell you about ourselves until after we do an exercise.
Okay, so what we're going to do is to do basically a virtual walk through the park. It's going to take about 5 minutes, and I've got my little puppy dog Topaz here who's just doing a little bit of a whinge because she's over me right now. And that's fair enough, I'm over me too. So I'm going to ask you to turn off your phones and just to close your eyes and just focus in on my voice. At the end of this, we're going to be asking a few reflective questions to see what you heard. That doesn't sound right, does it? Just see. To understand what you heard and what you saw. Okay, so close your eyes. Take a minute to imagine yourself in a public park. Just for now, it is empty of people. It's a warm summer's day, the trees are heavy with leaves, and the sun breaks through to make you feel warm. There is a slight breeze. You can feel it on your face. As you look forward, you can see a path wandering away into the distance. Around the path there are grassy areas, freshly cut grass and large leafy trees. The only sound is of birds singing. You hear the birds and you smell the freshly cut grass. You feel the heat of the sun on your face and are refreshed by that slight breeze. You look in front of you and decide to follow the path. You begin to move and feel the path beneath you. You hear human voices in the distance. You look first to your left and then to your right. You notice a young child kicking a football. The child throws the ball into the air and catches it as it falls. You notice the ball fall hard into the child's hands. Two people are playing with the child. You smile and wave towards them, noticing their smiles on their faces. You continue to walk around some large trees and pass two people sitting on a bench. They are laughing loudly. You try to hear what they are saying. You move on again along the path and see a parent pushing a pram coming towards you. As you walk on, a number of men are sitting on a park bench by the path, talking and laughing. You look at them one by one. Someone passes you with their dog. As you walk on, you are nearing the gate at the edge of the park. You walk through the gateway, and in front of you is a building. You walk into the building. When you're ready, you begin to slowly open your eyes and come back into the room.
So what I'm going to do now is just to ask you some questions about what you saw, heard, experienced. And as I said before, if you're comfortable, just let them out. I can't see you. Well, I can, but you're all blurry. What we're asking here is to practice inclusion, so you can yell them out. You can wave your hand loudly if that's not comfortable for you, because I can see that. But also Anthea, Sharon and Imogen can see your hands being raised as well. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about your journey through this park. So think about this. When you saw the ball, was the child a female child or a male child? Clap your hands if you thought it was a female child. What about a male child? Okay. What about no gender whatsoever? Okay. The two people you saw with the child, did you imagine them to be the child's parents? Clap your hands if yes. We'll do an audio thing on this. This could be good for home too. Okay. This is another inclusive practice with blindness, is doing an audio nod of the head. So do you imagine them to be the child's parents? Okay. Were their parents of the same gender? Different genders? Did you imagine them not to be the parents, maybe the grandparents? Okay. So the two people sitting on the bench, what did they look like to you? Have a think about that. Did you think of a culture or an ethnicity? I'm going to clap your hands if you saw that. A couple of people. Can I ask someone to be brave and say what culture or ethnicity they might have seen the people to be? Was it the same as you, for example, or a different culture to yourself? Same culture?
Same as my husband, who's Filipino, so I speak to him family members.
Okay. Anyone see someone that from a different culture to your own?
I can't see pictures in my brain.
Okay.
It's just black, like a flickable.
Okay. So when you were going through the walk in the park, were you able to get any gist out of this?
No.
Okay. So we'll give another exercise in a moment that might help with that one. Okay. So apologies for that. We're always learning as well. Sometimes we do these things and we think, it didn't quite work. So that's something for us to take on board. So thank you for letting me know. So when we were thinking about these two people sitting on a park bench, did you see any obvious disability? Clap your hands if you did. Can I ask what the disability was?
Mobility.
Mobility, okay. And do you have people in your world with mobility problems?
Yes.
Okay. So the parents pushing the pram, were they male or female, old or young? Anyone want to share? So were they young parents pushing the prams? Clap your...
The young male parent.
Young male parent. We've been seeing a lot more young male parents around Brunswick, so that's probably what I'd be seeing. Seems to be, I've been noticing this lately, so it's an interesting one to note that as well. Has anyone seen grandparents pushing the pram in that sort of scenario? Yeah, so a few people there. Okay. And again, think about their ability. Were they obviously from a different ability category? Were they of a different culture? Just ask yourself that sort of question. The person who passed you with their dog, again, what was the gender? What was the culture? So it's the same sort of thing, just to think about that. And when you think about the dog, was it a pet dog or was it a guide dog? Did anyone see a guide dog? Yeah. So when I first experimented with this on Imogen, she said guide dog because the guide dog's in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's influenced by what is in front of you sometimes, okay, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But did anyone else here see a guide dog? We mostly see one other person, okay, probably influenced by experience with guide dogs, service dogs, yeah? Okay.
But when you get to the door into the building, is it an automatic door? Clap your hands. Yeah. Which we don't have enough of on this campus either. Is it one of what I call a revolting door? Okay. And I have got stuck not being able to get into buildings for meetings because of revolving doors. Or did you have to push the door, pull the door, and was it a heavy door? So think exactly. So this reflective process is something that we're really pushing for people to be doing, because the aim of this project, this sort of walk and this sort of work, is to say what we tend to see around us or be part of or whatever is very much influenced by our own lived experience. If our own lived experience is, and I'm going to be very blunt here because we need to be courageous about saying these things, if your own lived experience is, for example, white and able-bodied, then that's what you're going to be influenced by. That's where you're going to have your comfort zone, okay? We all, every single one of us, have unconscious biases, okay, because we tend to gravitate as a human race towards what is familiar. So that's what will mostly come out in an exercise like this, is what is familiar. The culture that we're familiar with, the going up the steps, opening a door, not a problem for most people, but very problematic for others. So we have this thing that is this unconscious biases that are always going on. Those are going to very heavily influence how you are with staff and students, or people in the world generally, but let's just stick with the university. So if we're not aware of our unconscious biases, then we're going to start creating problems and barriers, and we're not even aware of it, okay? And I'm saying all of us, because I have my own set of unconscious biases. I don't know everything about every single culture and every single ability. So I still need to be learning and be open to that. But, because I've got to stop reading Braille now, so we can share a mic.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm just going to ask you to do for a moment is, some of you will know my colleague Sharon, my colleague Anthea, and my colleague Imogen. Some of you will know me, but some of you won't. So I just want you to think about just looking at us, because this is what we do as a human race. We look at people and we make assumptions. Okay, this is what and there's all these psychological and sociological theories to back up what I'm saying here. But just to have a think about, okay, seeing Sharon, seeing Anthea, seeing myself and seeing Imogen, what assumptions do you get to? And I'm not going to ask you to share them. I just want you to have a think. And I'm going to hand over to Sharon first to introduce herself. I'm not going to go first, Sharon. I'm going to throw you under the bus. I'm good at throwing people under the bus, and I'm really good at volunteering people.
Well, thank you. That is. My name is Sharon, and I am not an Aboriginal woman. And my PhD was looking at the barriers for Indigenous students with a disability to engage with higher education. My background has been as a teacher and with bias, I would often ask people, what do you think I used to teach? And they would say, oh, it must have been cooking because you're so, curvy. And but no, I was a Japanese language teacher for many years.
Curvilicious.
And but I was married to the most wonderful man on God's earth, and he passed last year after 41 years together. And he had not been able to walk since he was 14. And so I had journeyed with him in an inaccessible world. And together we had 3 beautiful children. And sadly, 2 of those boys developed schizophrenia at the age of 20. So again, my heart has been guided towards how inaccessible this world is and what it feels like to be excluded. At Macquarie University, I headed up a team that developed online education and then started a national service to support students with disability to engage. And again, that was 150 staff, half with disability and half who didn't have disability. I come to this with the knowledge and the passion that we all have abilities, we all have disabilities, and we have to ensure that all are included.
And Sharon is also the Senior Research Associate on our ARC grant. So Sharon came to me via a wonderful man by the name of John Gilroy, who's a professor at the University of Sydney, who is Aboriginal and identifies as being hard of hearing. I had to get the wording right because I've got about 4 different phrases in my head then. And so I rang John about the grant when we were writing this and asked John if he could be on it, but he was overcommitted, as a lot of Aboriginal people are. And he said, but have you spoken to Sharon? So it's tick of approval from an Aboriginal man that I highly respect. So that's how Sharon came to me. So oftentimes this is how it works within both the Aboriginal world and the disability world. It's like, who are we safe with? Who are the good ones? That's the question we will ask, or at least who are willing to learn. Okay, so Anthea, I'll throw you under the bus now.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Anthea Skinner. I'm from down on South Bank campus. I'm from the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, so I'm hardcore Hass, I guess. I kind of think of myself.
You are.
And I'm one of the chief investigators on this project. I'm a musicologist, and I think, like Sheelagh, I worked very, very hard to not be a disability researcher, but it kind of sucked me in eventually.
Yep. Stop the fighting.
Yep, mainly because I realised that there was no one studying the wonderful disabled musicians that I was working with, so someone had to step in and fill that gap. Some of you will have, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed I walk with a giant pair of crutches. Sometimes I have a mobility scooter. I have a whole range of walking aids depending on the day. And that's probably the most obvious part of my disability, but it's actually not the one that affects my life the most in any way, shape or form. I have a neurological condition caused by a viral brain injury that I had when I was 12. So actually, for example, although I made a joke about the steps in the
I was waiting for this.
The one we just did, I actually really struggled to hold that story in my head. So because I have a brain injury, when Sheelagh started saying, and what did you think of the people pushing the pram? I'm like, there was a pram? I don't remember that. I remember the first bit of the story and the last bit of the story, and everything in the middle is kind of a bit of a blur. Which is funny because, I'm also a genius, so I don't know how those things fit together. But
And very modest.
Anyway, so I first started getting involved in, Indigenous studies when my colleague, Professor Sharon Kerr, who is the missing member of our team,
Yep.
who is out on country doing ceremony at the moment, he was working at the University of Adelaide at the National Centre for Aboriginal Language and Music Studies, and he asked me on board because he was organising a big conference and he needed someone who could support the disabled Indigenous elders who are coming.
Yeah.
And I went, yeah, sure, that's what I do. I do that every day. And I had done that every day for many, many people for many, many years. And I guess that was my big introduction to disability is a whole other thing in the Indigenous world. Just the prevalence of it. So I'm very good at organising Auslan interpreters and screen readers, but all of a sudden I was finding myself booking dialysis.
For anyone home, that was the guide dog shaking.
That's working with people with very, very serious chronic health conditions, and also working with the sort of ableist assumptions of the hospitals who we were having to work in contact with to get them to our various campi. And for example, if you book dialysis away from the person's home, it's called holiday dialysis. And they're telling me things, oh, isn't it wonderful she's coming to visit her grandchildren? I'm like, no, she's a professor who is coming to work for us, and she needs to have her dialysis while she's here so she doesn't die. So there's, I guess that's where I sort of started.
Yeah, and I
walking
went
into the.
I went to that conference to suss you out.
Okay, yeah.
For the research, and thought, yeah, she's good. And then I contacted Anthea about coming onto this research grant, and she said, have you spoken to Aaron? So that's, again, this word of mouth that we often get caught up in, because the university protocol says you have to advertise the positions. I'm not quite ready to do that yet. We're not quite culturally safe or disability confident enough to be able to do that. We do understand the need for it, and yes, we do advertise at times, like we're doing for PhD and honours scholarships right now. But it's like we really need to be feeling safe enough and confident enough culturally and ability-wise to be able to do the work that we know needs to be done. So I'm going to throw Imogen under the bus now, who has been stalking me for 4 years.
This is her favourite way of talking about the way that we met. And I always have to say, it's mutual, Sheelagh.
Is it?
I'm Imogen. I'm a research assistant on with the BlakAbility team. But I actually have sort of a dual role in my work at the university. And I'm also a PhD student. So I also work with Sheelagh to, my title is Digital Access Worker. Well, technically Digital Support Worker, but we don't like that word. And so although I've known Sheelagh for many years, we met in America at a conference in 2020, just before we all locked down during the pandemic.
About a week before.
Yeah, and became friends there, and happened to both move to the University of Melbourne. And when Sheelagh needed someone to work with her to help her access all the inaccessible things at the university, actually when you were putting together this ARC grant, I came on board and started, because the ARC portal is completely inaccessible for anyone that uses any assistive screen reading sort of technology.
And let's be honest, it's not great for the rest of us. But,
It is. That is, I was going to say, it is horrendous even if you're fully sighted. This is sort of the joke we made all the time.
Try and do it with your eyes closed.
I'm a non-Indigenous woman. I come from colonial settler heritage, mostly kind of Anglo-Saxon heritage. And Sheelagh also invited me early on in...
I don't think I invited you, I think I volunteered you.
Yeah, to work with her as a tutor, teaching in Indigenous Australia. Freaked out and said, okay, I'm an architect. Also, you know I'm not Aboriginal, right? And she said, yeah. And I haven't ever worked, I didn't study arts. Yep. Are you sure you want me to do this? Yeah.
And why did I want you to do that? Do you remember?
Because...
You're in the same position as most of our students.
Yeah.
Okay, most of our students in Indigenous studies come from not Indigenous backgrounds, not all, but the large proportion of our Indigenous studies students are non-Indigenous from across schools and faculties, so some architects, some pharmacologists, you name it, we have them in Indigenous studies. Yeah. So my thinking in this process was to say, you're going to understand what these students are going to need because you're needing it as well. So I'm, as we're saying, Sheelagh Daniels-Mayes. I'm a Gomeroi woman, so northwestern New South Wales. If you think of towns like Tamworth and Moree, that's where my mob are from. That's on my mother's side. My mum passed away when I was 4 years old, when she was 29. So I was raised by my non-Aboriginal grandparents in a town that was extremely racist and extremely unsafe. So my Aboriginality was hidden from me until I accidentally found out about it as an adult. So I've spent the last 30 years or so being raised up by a number of wonderful elders in my Aboriginal culture. So I've got this childhood of whiteness and an adulthood of blackness that comes in really handy for working between all of these different worlds that I have to work as an Aboriginal Australian woman. I lost most of my eyesight when I was about 7. For all of my life, it was told to me that I'd lost my eyesight because of measles that I had at the time, and I only really got a proper diagnosis 2 years ago. That said that it was what is called childhood glaucoma, and an overuse of steroids to treat asthma as a child was the cause of my blindness. So it took, something like 50 years to actually get a diagnosis. And this is not uncommon. We expect staff and students with disability to come with their medical thing and have their diagnosis. There may not be one, or you may not be able to afford to go to the psychiatrist to get it or whatever, but we are depending on these things. And recently we've just done the review of the staff, the Student Equity and Disability Services here, and that was something that came up constantly as having to prove your disability all the time, okay? And so that now is going to be changing. Slowly that will change to having other options to be able to get that support from disability services. But at the same time, I have a disability, I can't hide it. It's a little bit hard to hide a guide dog in your backpack. We have tried, she doesn't quite fit. But the other thing is that coming into the university as an Indigenous academic in the Indigenous Studies program, it's an identified position, fair enough, but I'm fortunate that we are at a university that doesn't require for me to have that precious piece of paper from some organisations to say, yes, she is Aboriginal. Okay, I don't have that piece of paper because of that history of my mother dying and being raised in the white family and so forth. I've tried to get that history for 50 years, but the archival records are not there. But to take up an identified position here at the university, I had to sign a stat dec to say that I identify as being Aboriginal, that I have heritage as being Aboriginal, and I'm accepted by the community as being Aboriginal. Now, if I lie on that piece of paper, I can face 5 years in prison. So as an Indigenous person, we're often having to do these proof things that most Australians don't have to do, but then I'm also having to do it for disability. Okay, I'm having to come with medical certificates. And yes, the obvious, like Anthea was saying, the obvious disability here today is blindness. But my other disability is to do with mental health and post-traumatic stress, okay? But I also live with 13 or 14 chronic health conditions. So those health conditions probably are more of a disability than my blindness, okay? Particularly the tiredness that comes with having a disability. You start the day tired, you end the day exhausted, and some days you start exhausted and just continue on.
It depends if you're trying to get access to a particular piece of literature in a digital format, in an accessible format. Sometimes those days, maybe that disability might be the more prominent one.
Yeah, that's true. So it can shift.
It changes on different days.
Yeah, it can shift. Like last year, it was pretty dominated by my husband. My darling, loving husband gave me COVID twice last year. Once 2 weeks before teaching was due to start and 3 days before the ARC was due to be submitted. Not good. And then the second time was in the middle of the referendum with all the racism that was going on. So, and I still couldn't take leave from that. So this is stuff that goes on for Indigenous staff and disabled staff and students all the time that is not visible to you guys most times.
And I think, you're talking about how we expect our disabled students to arrive with a diagnosis and understanding the disability, and that is not always the case. And in fact, because of the age of undergraduate students, it's often not the case. There's a lot of disabilities, particularly in the sort of mental health field, that are diagnosed at around the sort of late teens, early 20s. But you reflected on having basically a quote-unquote white childhood and a black adulthood. That's also very common amongst our students, especially, look at where we are geographically. We're in one of the most colonised parts of the country. People are quite often have been dislocated from their communities, and they're at that age now. They're hitting their late teens, early 20s, where they're wanting to learn more about that. We take a lot of students up to northeast Arnhem Land, to Yolngu country, for activities, and we often have Indigenous students from Victoria go up there with the expectation that they'll feel like they're coming home. And that's not the case. A, they're not from northeast Arnhem Land. B, Yolngu people have a kind of, if you're not Yolngu, you're nothing. They don't kind of have this pan-Indigenous attitude that we have down here. And so we often deal with students who are going through a massive trauma because they've gone there expecting to find home, to find their own culture. And they've arrived and discovered that at the point they're at now, it's still just as foreign to them as everything else. And that can be very, very confronting. And then there's a whole other journey they then have to go on to discover where they really fit in. Which of course, and there is a place they fit in. It's just not always obvious.
No, and that sense of belonging goes way beyond that concept of inclusion. There's a feeling like inclusion is something that we really have to do by law sometimes and policy. Belonging is something that we all make a choice to make a student or a staff member feel welcomed, safe, comfortable, confident. And Sharon has talked about before that quite often what we get is Indigenous staff and students who've got an undiagnosed disability because everything that might not be going right because of that disability has been racialised as a typical Aboriginal person. So therefore, you struggle as a student, you quit and they go away, they get a diagnosis, come back knowing the diagnosis and how to work with that diagnosis and succeed.
Yeah.
But racism has got in the way of that diagnosis.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, and as in my role, I'm starting to reach out to participants, and it's been very interesting to hear. This isn't part of the interviews, but just getting to know them. But firstly, the fear that especially the staff in the universities have, that their disability will be the reason that they won't pass probation or that they won't be kept on, and just preliminary stories are of bombing out with any studies or not being able to concentrate, and then to be diagnosed with a condition that can have support, say ADHD, and then excelling and life totally changing. But you even think about for those of you who wear glasses, if you take your glasses off, you can strain, you can read, but you may not read for any more than 10 minutes, which means then for someone who hasn't had their eyes checked or hasn't had the money to buy the $500 glasses, that they're just seeing that they've got poor concentration. And as Sheelagh says, the outcome is racialised. And I think that this is what I'm so excited about with this BlakAbility project, is that we're going to get the voices of both Indigenous staff and students living with disability, hearing their stories and hearing how we can do things better. And I think that we're looking forward to being able to advocate, represent and put forward programs and ways of doing that will help all universities in Australia to be more welcoming, more of a place of belonging for all of us.
It was interesting last week. I was in, and I'm not being modest here either, I was in Canberra Parliament House last week receiving an award for Social Sciences Week. And
Naturally.
bragging now. And I was speaking to a senior gentleman, I won't name him, a white man, and he said, "So what's your discipline?" And I said, "I'm a sociologist, psychologist, criminologist, teacher, educator." He went, "Oh." And he said, "So what university?" And I went, Western Sydney University, Charles Sturt University, Monash University, University of South Australia, Sydney University, now Melbourne. And he went, "You're very unstable." And I went, "Thank you, that's the nicest thing that's ever been told to me." But what I hadn't told him, and what we're going to have a discussion about shortly, is the reason behind all of those different disciplines is not because I'm addicted to learning, although I am. It was racism and ableism in there. So criminology I had to remove myself from because I couldn't get the journal articles to be able to write my thesis for my criminology masters. I removed myself from psychology because we didn't have the technology to do all the mathematics and get the registration for it. I qualified as a high school teacher, but despite suing 2 education departments, I was not allowed to become a teacher because I would not be able to keep duty of care. So there's a lot of discrimination behind that unstableness in me. But all of those studies now come in very handy for what I do. But when I meet with this person in a couple of weeks and go, "Okay, let me tell you the story about the amount of discrimination that is behind that moving of universities and moving of disciplines."
But it's interesting when you say that. I mean, in your situation, you're unable to avoid the discrimination through non-disclosure. But I didn't mention my PhD research, what it is, before. I'm looking at disability inclusion in workplace design, and one of my case study workplaces is within the university, and a number of the participants haven't disclosed their disability to the university because they don't need to. If you didn't need to, if you don't require a reasonable adjustment, or it's not necessary to disclose, when you face all of this discrimination, why would you?
Exactly. Give us it's like a 15-year-old boy I heard about last week that said, "Why would I report racism to the racists?" That's a 15-year-old boy from WA, you know, and high rates of juvenile incarceration of Aboriginal children. But that's the wisdom. Why would you report racism to a racist? Why would you report ableism to an ableist?
So you might have seen a few of these lying around. It's also the QR code that's up on the screen. What this is so there's this wonderful idea from Universal Design for Learning called a +1 pledge. So +1 thinking is an approach from Universal Design that's intended to help educators to embed principles of universal design by first focusing on pain points for themselves or for their students, and then thinking of just one more way to reduce those pain points or to overcome those barriers, right? So, for example, you might provide course materials in one more format, or you might provide a way to allow students to demonstrate their knowledge of key concepts for the subject in one more way. Here, with the BlakAbility team, we've sort of adapted this concept of the +1 pledge through this, and it's on this Padlet under this QR code, just to give you some resources to encourage you to commit to just one more thing to advance the efforts of culturally responsive disability inclusion in your everyday. So here we've got just a few different kind of topics and things that you can commit to, and we'd love for you to comment on it and make a commitment or ask questions of things, but it's a series of resources, so have a little
and we've done a whole lot of
that.
stuff around strategies, podcast, online exhibitions, so it can fit very much into your teaching, into your workplace, whatever you need to do, and it will grow. I found Padlet, after 6 years of fighting with Padlet, to be accessible using a screen reader. Doesn't mean it's going to be accessible for everybody. If it isn't, let us know, and then we will help you to fight Padlet, like I have done. Good old Padlet. but tested it on me, and I was able to use it independently as a screen reader. So that bodes well for most. But we do encourage you to just have a look at those. If you've got other ones that you think might be good for us to know about, let us know.
Please share.
It is about setting up a share. We're going to continue to use this Padlet for other events as well.